Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about a new form. For the past 2 days, we've been working in slope-intercept form, and that's our ultimate goal. That's where we're going to end up today. But we're also going to learn a form called point-slope form. I've told you guys all along that mathematicians are really creative in their naming. Guess what you need for point-slope form? A point and a slope. So the equation or the formula for point-slope form is y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1, where m is still your slope. That's going to be your slope this whole unit. M is always your slope. And x1, y1 is your given point. So hopefully you've already copied down your notes for this lesson. I'm going to be walking through those steps with you for all of our examples today. All right, so step number 1 said to label your x1, y1. The reason that I'm going to have you do that is so that you don't get confused, since there's multiple y's and multiple x's, okay? So right here in our first example, it goes through the point, -5, 1, and my slope is -4/5. Don't panic just because you see a fraction. It's okay, fractions happen. So to label my x1, y1, x always comes first, y always comes second. There's my given point. Step 2 says to plug in point and slope into point-slope form. So in point-slope form, it's y minus the y value equals the slope, -4/5, times x minus the x value of -5. Step number 3. Up here in step number 2, it says leave the subtraction signs for now. I know some of you notice this double negative, and you know what's about to happen. You know that's going to turn to a positive. I want you to leave them there for now because these subtraction signs are part of the formula. Get used to leaving them there. Step number 3 says do the distributive property with the slope. So seeing this number right on the outside of parentheses, that reminds me to do the distributive property. So I take this -4/5 times x, and I'm going to take it times this. At this point, you can go ahead and change that to a great big positive. Okay? I haven't changed anything on this side yet. I still have a y minus 1 equals -4/5 times x is -4/5 x. -4/5 times 5 is a -4. If you're not comfortable doing that kind of arithmetic in your brain, that's fine. Use a calculator. That's why you have them, okay? After this point, number 4 says use opposite operations to isolate your y. Isolate means get it by itself, so that means I need to move this -1. What's the opposite operation of subtracting 1? Adding 1. I can't add it to this x because those aren't like terms, so that means I need to come and add it over here. So I get y equals -4/5 x minus 3. And that's my linear equation whenever I was given a point and a slope. That's how you use your steps to go through those. We're going to do it a couple more times here. So in our next example, we're going through the point 3, -4 with a slope of 1/3. Step number 1 is to label your x1, y1. So you're labeling your point. Here's my x1, there's my y1. This is my m. Slope is always m. Step number 2, substitute that into your point-slope form. So it's going to be y minus a -4 equals my slope times x minus the x that they gave me, which was 3. Step number 3, use the distributive property with your slope. So we're distributing that through to both things. At this point, you can go ahead and fix your double negatives. So minus a negative, that's going to become y plus 4 equals 1/3 x minus 1. Positive times a negative gives me a negative. 1/3 times 3 gives me 1. After that, we are going to use opposite operations to isolate y. So I'm going to subtract 4, subtract 4. I'm lining it up under the 1 because those are my like terms. It's not a like term with the x. They cancel out here, and so I'm left with y equals 1/3 x minus 5. Okay? On these next examples, I want you trying to work them before I do. Still use your steps, but I want you trying to beat me, okay? So for our next example, let's say that we're going through the point 1, -3 with a slope of 1. I'm going to label my x1, y1. Then I'm going to plug into my point slope form. Y minus the y that they give me equals the slope times x minus the x that they give me. My next step is to use the distributive property. So I can fix my double negative now. So I get y plus 3 equals 1 times x is x, 1 times -1 is -1. Isolate my y using opposite operations. Subtract 3 from both sides, and we get y equals x minus 4. Starting to get a little bit easier, starting to get a little bit faster. And let's look at another one. If I'm going through the point -2, 4, and my slope is -4, label your x1, y1, then plug into your point slope form. Y minus the y that they give you equals your slope times x minus the x that they give you. I'm about to do my distributive property, and I notice this double negative. That's okay. You can fix it. So right here, go ahead and fix that. That way you don't get confused with your signs. -4 times x is -4x. -4 times a +2 gives me a -8. I haven't done anything with this side yet, so I just copy it down. Next step is to isolate my y using opposite operations. So I'm going to add 4 to both sides and combine like terms to simplify it into slope-intercept form. Hopefully we're starting to feel a little bit better. We're going to do one more. I'm not going to talk you through this one, but I am going to work it out. So I'm hoping that you guys are kind of starting to get the hang of it. Last one before I turn you loose. So it's going to go through the point -3, -1 with a slope of -3/7. Guys, on something like this that has so many negative signs, be careful. Take your time. Make sure you don't make any silly mistakes. So step 1, label your x1, y1. I told you I wasn't going to talk you through this, but I feel really silly doing a video without talking. So now we're plugging into our point slope form. Y minus y1 equals the slope times x minus x1. Lots of double negatives. We can go ahead and fix those. That's turned into a big O plus. This turns into a big O plus. Next, we do the distributive property with our slope. Haven't done anything over on this left side, so we can just copy it down. -3/7 times x is -3/7x. -3/7 times 3 gives me a -9/7. Because you can make that into a fraction, top times top, bottom times bottom. That's how I got to here. Once again, if you're not comfortable with fractions, feel free to use a calculator right here. That's okay. Last step, isolate your y using opposite operations. Subtract 1, subtract 1. since I'm dealing with a fraction over here, I'm going to go ahead and change that to a negative 7 over 7 because it gives me a common denominator. So we get y equals negative 3 over 7x minus 16 over 7. At this point, you could also change this to a mixed number, and that would be negative 2 2/7. You could change it to a decimal, and it would be negative 2.29. I don't really care what you do with this one back here. Fractions happen. Frequently they happen, especially in real life. And I would prefer that you leave your slopes as fractions since it's rise over run, but your y-intercept, if I were to ask you where 16 over 7 is on a number line, you probably wouldn't be able to tell me. So it's okay if you want to change that one to a decimal. But that is point slope form. We're going to be practicing with that over the next couple days. So if you have any questions, let me know.